this floating group of people was incredibly diverse. We came from a variety of countries, spoke a variety of languages. Nico was on this train for a good chunk of it, and first months got to see the train pass through here, and all different religions, races, economic backgrounds. We had a former Colombian communist guerrilla sitting at the same table as a billionaire. But there was this incredible mesh where we all moved through these various different experiences together in a really easy way. And we saw value in a similar range of experiences. We had critiques of a similar nature of things that we had seen and experienced together. When we moved through these different environments and engaged with folks from those places, we all had a similar style of engaging and similar desire about where to engage and how to engage. It was just a incredible mesh. For me, one of my tests of how compatible I'm going to be with someone is to travel with them. And sometimes I'm really surprised. Somebody that I've been really, really close to, I get out on the road with them, and this whole other side of them emerges. That's not wrong or bad, but really inconsistent with me and mine. Or on the other hand, you'll think that you may have some doubts about them on the road, and you get them on the road and you find out they're a total road warrior. So in this group of strangers who came together, there was really not, one flame out, right? Everybody was really meshing in this beautiful kind of way. And when I got off of that tour, I was back home in Oakland, and this is all before COVID hit. I was really missing this group of people. And when I say missing, I mean when you miss someone and your heart actually hurts, you can feel it physically. That kind of deep missing. And I was kind of surprised by that, because I've been on the road a lot, and since I opened Harborside in 2006, I've probably spoken at 100 different conferences in many different countries, and I wouldn't say that I'm jaded, because I take pleasure in every encounter that I have, but I don't go away from most trade shows feeling like I'm missing members of my family, and that's how I felt. So I started this reasoning with myself, asking myself how it was that in such a short period of time I developed such a deep attachment. And a complementary question, right, which was, how was it that this group of strangers managed to come together and all be so close with each other? And as I pondered it, what I realized was that no matter what our backgrounds were, we'd all had conversations with the same plants and the same substances. And so we'd had a similar set of experiences with those substances, those plants, and out of those experiences learned a set of common lessons. And out of those lessons, we've developed a shared value system. So no matter where you go in the world and you talk to people who are having conversations with plants and with visionary substances, they're going to tell you that they value individual freedom above corporate, state, or church authority, right? That they value nature over industry, that they value peace over war, that they value creativity over conformity, that the only thing that's really tolerable to our tribe is the idea of intolerance, right? Embracing the idea that every creature, every human, every living creature in the world has a purpose and a reason to be here, and embracing that spirit of radical inclusiveness. That's who our tribe is. And I saw that same value system reflected in Nico from Brazil, First Mon from Jamaica. We had, like I said, we had these billionaire investors from Canada, just a really wide range of people, and all shared that value system. So then I started thinking about it a little bit more, right? And started trying to wrap my head around what this meant, right? Because here's this group of people who have a shared value system, whose composition crosses all of the boundaries and all of the borders that usually separate human beings. So this is in itself is just this really powerful thing, right? The idea that because we're having the similar conversations with plants, that we can come together around a shared value system. But then I started thinking about like how many of us are there? And if you go to the United Nations and ask them, they'll tell you that there's around 270 million people who regularly consume cannabis in the world. I figure they're off by a factor of about 3. So there's like 900 million people worldwide right there. But even if you say it's 270 million, right? Then you consider that the US government says that 30 million Americans have found their way to visionary experiences so far. Or you talk to the Gallup poll that says that 20% of adult Americans have had psychedelic experiences. And then you think about the fact that this revolution that we're a part of is happening all over the world. I mean, there are people in Thailand who are doing ceremonies right now. There are people in Sweden who are doing ceremonies right now. There are people in the UK who are doing ceremonies. Right now, as we sit here, this thing is happening all over the world. And so, you know, 20% of the adult American population is you know, another 20, 30 million people. Even if you accept the government and UN figures at their face, which I don't, I think they're off by a factor of 2 or 3 or 4. I think there's probably about 1 billion of us worldwide. But even if you accept their figures, which get us up to about 350 million, that means that we are as large or larger than all but the largest nations on this planet. And we have a shared value system that crosses all of the things, all of the boundaries, all of the borders that usually separate human beings. So this is, for me, a huge potential that we have, a huge force for change, right? If we can self-identify consciously as this one tribe, right? And begin conversations with each other, asking ourselves, what is it that we're being called to? What is the mission that these substances, that these plants are calling us to? And how do we go about executing on that mission? And those questions are questions that none of us individually have the answer to. These are questions that need to be answered collectively by the entire tribe. And so that's where the Changemakers retreats come in. Is beginning those conversations among the tribe so that we can eventually get to a point where we have hundreds of millions of people who are self-identifying as being linked together in a common mission. And we can move, and we can make some of the kinds of changes that are going to be necessary to make if we want to preserve this planet for future generations. So I have my own ideas about what the mission that we're being called to is. I think all of us have some different ideas. There's going to be commonality in them. But we need to come together. We need to have a period of communion. Before we can act, we need to come to know one another. We need to understand that we are linked together by this common value system. And we need to have conversations, reasonings about what is the mission? What are we being called to? And so the idea of Changemaker retreats is to bring the tribe together, to start having these conversations, to start building to the point where the hundreds of millions of us worldwide can self-identify, can understand the commonality that we share. We can name our mission. We all understand that that's the mission and accept that that's the mission. Just think about what a force we could be and how well we could execute on that mission. So that is the One Tribe vision. It's where Changemakers retreats fall in. This is a vision that's not my vision. It's a vision that I think was downloaded from divine sources. And I think there's lots of people around the world who are having that same vision at this time in various different ways, calling it various different things. But it's a vibration that's resonating in all of our hearts. And, very often when I'm sharing the idea of one tribe, I barely get the words one tribe out of my mouth before people start nodding and saying, yep, 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 I got it. So that's an incredibly exciting thing to me. And, I would like us all to sort of think about this retreat as a pilot. And what worked really well, and are there things that could be done better, and how do we scale the idea of changemaker retreats up? It's not something that I see happening exclusively at Rastafari Indigenous Village. I see it happening in many places around the world, just like this revolution that we're part of is happening all over the world, just like there's ceremonies happening simultaneously with ours. For me, when we start thinking about how do we keep track of everybody, then the question comes up of who keeps track and how, and who is empowered to do that. And you're beginning to build a structure, right? And so I think whenever we're beginning to build a structure in a group of people, we need to do that in a very conscious kind of way, because structure often can move into an authoritarian kind of mode. And we want to make sure that whatever structure that we set up, that it's not going to do that, right? And it's so I think that as we ask ourselves about how do we keep track of everybody and how do we mobilize them, we need to ask ourselves, how do we want to govern ourselves in this tribe? And the answers to that vary widely. For me, I think that there's already this natural kind of coming together that's happening, and I think it needs room to breathe. I think of a period of time in the development of the tribe that I call the communion, and it's a time when we're coming together and we're trying to figure things out. And so, in the initial stage, we could, and we'd have to ask about who we is, right? But we could empower a person or persons to do certain specific things, to collect names and addresses, to be available for any submissions to a newsletter and to publish a newsletter, and give them no power or authority beyond that, right? Just the basic dialogue building tools that we would need. So I think that's one initial step that we could take. There's a really interesting book that I'm in the middle of reading right now called Reinventing Organizations. There's another name to it. I'll put it up in the group. And it's this really interesting concept of a different way of managing groups of people that's not hierarchical, that doesn't create a pyramid, that empowers the people who are closest to the effects and the impact of a decision to make that decision. And I think there's a lot of challenges at implementing that kind of governance in with folks who mostly have grown up with more authoritarian forms of governance. But I think we need to start that process. So what I'm hoping is that some folks show up who have really been doing deep thinking about this. So one of the people I'd like to come to the next Changemakers Retreat is a guy named Mike Margolis, who is active in the Global Psychedelic Society. And his mission within the Global Psychedelic Society, which is a kind of similar idea to what the One Tribe is, it's another manifestation of One Tribe, is he's really trying to introduce this new style of governance, which is non-hierarchical and empowers people closest to decisions to make those decisions. But So I'll send that information out in the group. But I know that there are people like Mike who have been thinking this through a lot, and so maybe there's a Changemakers retreat, which is specifically devoted to exploring the different ways that we could organize the tribe, and there can be a reasoning about that. So what I think is really important is that we like I said, we give it room to breathe, right? That we make sure that the process is slow enough and open enough so that we can pull in we're talking about needing to pull in hundreds of millions of people. Yeah, I think this is the first step, what we're doing here. And that, April asked a very similar question. Right? So I think that, right now, all that I think that we should really empower anybody to do on behalf of the group is to collect names and addresses, be open to receive information to be put in a newsletter, and to put a newsletter out periodically. It doesn't all need to be one person. That could be a group of people who volunteered to do that. And then I think we just need to keep on having these retreats and asking ourselves that question, right? If we're not going to erect a pyramid by which to govern ourselves, then what is the structure that is capable of holding us all together? Because we're talking about building a container that can hold hundreds of millions of people. And, how do we create something that's tight enough and strong enough to achieve its purpose of holding us all together, but is also open enough and loose enough so that it feels welcoming to the number of people that we need to bring in. And, whenever you're building a new thing, there can be a lot of excitement and a lot of people who are really excited about it and are really joining up. And I've been in those situations before, and it's a beautiful feeling when everybody's coming together in this common mission. But what I've learned is that you always have to be aware that there are people on the edges of those circles who are kind of looking in at that activity, and not feeling like they can be a part of it, or not feeling like they've been invited in, or that they're not cool enough, not smart enough, or that those aren't my people. And so, how do we keep the funnel wide enough open so that we capture everybody? And we should invite people to Changemaker retreats who have been doing work on this question, because just like there's people who have been trying to figure out alternative economic systems, like one of the groups that I'm involved in conversations with is launching a mission-based stock exchange where the companies that are listed are going to be evaluated and graded on the basis of how well they execute on their mission. And people can invest accordingly. Likewise, there's people who are doing this, work on alternative organizational structures. And their tribe, they're out there. We just need to call them and give them the invite and let them know that this is a question that we're grappling with. And so like my friend Bobby Fishkin, we would talk to him and ask Bobby to put out a call for the alternative economic change makers and the alternative governance structure change makers. And he's got a bunch of interesting people, I'm sure, and we would invite them to a change makers retreat and see what comes of it. I think that it's a model that can work anywhere, and so there's room to do so many things. If any of you were so inclined to think about organizing a change makers retreat in another spot, I'd be happy to work with you on that as well. My idea is that these conversations happen globally, everywhere that we are, right? But I think, more than anything, I want those conversations to be conscious, right? Just the idea that we are one tribe. I think, and that these conversations are, focused on us understanding what our mission is and how to execute it a bit better. So we need to make that call a kind of specific, but I think that it's, like I said, this is a vision that I think is in many people's hearts. And, you know, there's plenty of there's places in Costa Rica that we could go. But you know, I've already begun a list of people to invite to the next Changemakers retreat here. And certainly if any of you wanted to come back for another time, you'd be, you know, most welcome to do that. If you're interested in pursuing this vision, if you're interested in, you know, volunteering for any of that administrative stuff around newsletter stuff, let me know, and we can make it happen. As we think about scaling the vision around the world, we want to ask ourselves, you know, where are there other communities that have the same essential qualities that this community has? And, you know, we know that there's some spots in Jamaica that we could work on, but there's also many places around the world. So, but not an extraordinary number of them, right? There's not that many indigenous groups that have territory, that have embraced this vision, and are really willing to engage the way that Rastafari Indigenous Village has engaged. And then if they are, often lack the kind of infrastructure to be able to welcome people into their communities. So, you know, ideally, you know, we would be able to identify communities, other indigenous communities that have a sacramental relationship with visionary plants, who would be able to empower to have centers like this one. And so, you know, our hope is that, you know, that this is, you know, a year or two from now, that we can point to a very successful pilot project that was funded with this integrity contract. And when I show, like, my accountants and tax people this integrity contract, they're like, "What is this, Steve? I don't understand this. It's not a loan. It's not, you know, it's nothing, right?" And I'm like, "Well, you know, it's an integrity contract. It's this new thing." And which is nice because it gives me some flexibility in you know, how to claim that on taxes and stuff like that. And, you know, the idea is that once we've demonstrated that it can be done, that the investment money came back, that it came back with a little bit on top of it for whoever provided that investment money, enough on top of it to make it, you know, a fairly attractive investment, or maybe a spectacular investment, and then start thinking about, you know, where we can execute on number two.